Welcome. We're opening up the congressional record for October 28th, 2025 today. Our mission, as always, is to give you a really structured, clear look at the key legislative dynamics from the day. And October 28th was, well, it was quite a day. Showed a real split screen in Washington.
It really did. You saw the stark contrast playing out. On one hand, the Senate seemed completely stuck, paralyzed even, on basic government funding. But then you flip the channel, so to speak, and they were incredibly decisive on lifetime judicial appointments and big regulatory changes.
A vivid picture of where the power struggles and, the ideological fights really are right now. Before we dive into that analysis of the source material, just a quick request. Please do take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps us continue bringing you this kind of focused information.
Yeah, that support is crucial. And getting back to that contrast, it wasn't just what they voted on, it was why certain things moved and others just hit a wall. It tells you a lot about the political motives and, frankly, where the consensus requirements are biting hardest.
Okay, let's start with that wall, the budget. Congress is, yet again, steering the country toward a potential shutdown, the immediate cause. The Senate failed again to move forward on a temporary government funding bill.
That's right. We're talking about House Resolution 53721. The formal title is the Continuing Appropriations and Extensions Act 2026.
Sounds official, but it's really just a stopgap measure, isn't it?
Exactly. It's what's called a continuing resolution, or a CR. Think of it as hitting pause. Its only job is to keep federal agencies running at their current funding levels just for a short period.
And this one was supposed to keep things going through when? November 21st.
Correct. November 21st, 2025. It was designed purely to buy more time, just a few weeks, for Congress to hopefully finish the actual appropriations bills for the full year.
So House Resolution 5371, this temporary fix, it actually passed the House way back in September, right? Though just barely.
It did, yeah. Narrow margin. But then it arrived in the Senate and, well, it ran straight into that classic Senate obstacle.
The filibuster. We need to talk about the procedure here because it wasn't a vote on the bill itself, was it?
No, not on final passage. This was the vote on the motion to end debate, what they call invoking cloture. And to get past a filibuster on most major legislation, you need that supermajority, 3/5 of the Senate. That's 60 votes.
And the vote count.
It came in at 54 yeas to 45 nays.
So 6 votes short.
6 votes short. Which really underscores a fundamental truth about the Senate today. That 60-vote threshold basically turns everything important into a negotiation where the minority has huge leverage.
Even for something as basic as keeping the government open.
Especially for that, it seems. The fact that a unified minority can block even this kind of must-pass bill using the filibuster, that's probably the key institutional point of the day.
Okay, so let's unpack the positions. Republicans and the administration were pushing this bill, calling it responsible. Why the unified Democratic opposition, if shutdowns are usually bad politics for everyone?
Right. The administration line, echoed by allies like Appropriations Chair Tom Cole, was that this is a clean funding bill. Just keep the lights on, stop a senseless government shutdown. This shouldn't be partisan. That was the argument.
Clean, meaning no extra policy stuff tacked on.
That's how they defined it. Just maintain the status quo funding levels, no controversial policy writers. But for Democrats, that term clean CR is, well, it's politically loaded. They see it differently.
How so?
Because for them, agreeing to a clean CR means letting it pass without addressing their priorities. They lose their leverage. Reports and comments from folks like Senator Soon suggest the sticking point is a desire to force negotiations on other issues, especially expiring tax credits under the Affordable Care Act.
The ACA tax credits. Okay, so connect the dots. What happens if those expire, and how does that tie into blocking the funding bill?
Well, those credits help millions of people afford health insurance bought on the marketplaces. If they expire, premiums could shoot up significantly for those individuals. That's a huge policy impact, and politically, it would land squarely on the Democrats if they didn't fight it.
So they're using the must-pass nature of the funding bill to force a discussion on the ACA credits.
Essentially, yes. Their position seems to be, you want us to vote for a bill that just maintains the status quo? Well, part of the status quo is these vital credits expiring soon, and that's unacceptable to us. So the status quo itself isn't clean. They're using their power under Senate rules, the filibuster, to demand action on these other programs.
Which brings us back to that word clean. It's really a fight over the definition, isn't it?
It absolutely is, a semantic battle with real consequences. For Republicans, clean means straightforward, administrative. For Democrats, voting yes on that same clean bill feels like passively accepting an outcome they fiercely oppose on social programs.
It really highlights the breakdown in the normal budget process.
Completely. CRs were meant to be emergency patches. Now they're almost routine because Congress struggles to pass the 12 regular appropriations bills on time. And now, even the emergency patch itself gets tangled in these high-stakes policy fights because the minority feels it's their only chance to exert influence. The failure to pass even this short-term CR tells you the whole budget process is, maybe, fundamentally strained.
Okay, so if the budget fight showed the Senate grinding to a halt, the action on judicial nominations showed the exact opposite. Laser focus, rapid movement.
That's the other side of the coin. When it comes to lifetime appointments to the federal bench, the gridlock just evaporates. This is where you see the Senate operating with intense partisan efficiency.
Because the stakes are so high for shaping policy long term.
Precisely. If you can't easily pass laws because of the 60-vote rule, you focus on who interprets the laws. The courts are the key battleground, and judicial confirmations only need a simple majority. 51 votes, no filibuster possible there anymore.
So first up, on October 28th, was the confirmation vote for Jordan Emery Pratt. He's headed to the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Florida, and that vote was tight, 52-47.
Very tight. Pratt comes with a significant conservative legal pedigree. He's currently a judge on Florida's 5th District Court of Appeal. But his work before becoming a judge is really what fueled the opposition.
What kind of work?
He had senior positions at the First Liberty Institute and also at the Department of Justice, plus time as Florida's Deputy Solicitor General. First Liberty Institute, is a major legal group focused on religious freedom cases, often from a conservative perspective, school prayer, things like that.
So that background itself signals a certain judicial philosophy.
Absolutely. Opponents looked at his career and argued it showed a clear ideological drive, not just neutral legal practice.
And what were the specific points the opposition hammered on? Civil liberties groups, women's rights groups?
They came out strongly. The National Women's Law Center, for instance, talked about an alarming pattern they saw in his record. They pointed to his past work opposing abortion access, his arguments for expanding gun rights, including controversial ideas like guns on college campuses, and challenges he was involved in against LGBTQ+ protections.
So a record touching on several major social and legal flashpoints.
Definitely. But perhaps the most talked about part of the opposition came from his confirmation hearings. He reportedly refused to give direct answers on questions about the legitimacy of the 2020 election results and how he characterized the January 6th attack on the Capitol.
And that refusal became a major issue for opponents.
A huge issue. Critics framed it not just as dodging questions, but as a potential unwillingness to affirm basic democratic norms. They argued that's disqualifying for a lifetime federal judge appointment. But again, with the simple majority rule, 52 votes were enough to confirm him.
Right after Pratt's confirmation, the Senate moved immediately to the next judicial nominee, Edmund G. LaCour, Jr. He's nominated for the Northern District of Alabama, and they voted to invoke cloture and the debate on his nomination.
That's right. The cloture vote passed 53-46. That clears the procedural hurdle, setting up the final confirmation vote, likely very soon. LaCour is currently Alabama's Solicitor General. That's the state's top lawyer for appeals.
And his reputation?
Among conservatives, very strong. Praised for, quote, unparalleled legal skill. He's argued major cases, including at the Supreme Court. It's also worth noting the American Bar Association gave him its top rating, well qualified, which speaks to his professional credentials.
But just like Pratt, his nomination drew fierce opposition from progressive groups.
Yes, very similar dynamic. Groups like the Alliance for Justice painted his career as a, quote, far-right ideological crusade. They weren't really questioning his legal ability, but rather the policy outcomes he fought for as Alabama's Solicitor General.
What specific cases or policies were central to that criticism?
Well, he was the lead defender for some of Alabama's most controversial laws. That includes the state's very restrictive abortion laws. He also defended congressional maps that federal courts later found likely violated the Voting Rights Act by diluting black voting strength. And he defended state policies that targeted gender-affirming medical care for transgender youth.
So a consistent record of defending conservative state policies on major social issues.
Exactly. And like Pratt, he also faced questions about January 6th during his confirmation process.
And his response?
He reportedly declined to condemn the attack as an insurrection, instead calling its characterization a matter of political debate. For opponents, that response really cemented their view. They argue he wouldn't be a neutral judge, but someone likely to advance a specific political agenda from the bench. But the Senate majority, again needing only 51 votes for eventual confirmation, voted to move him forward.
So the judicial confirmation train keeps rolling. What happens next for LaCour and others in the pipeline?
For LaCour, because cloture was invoked, there's now a set time frame. A unanimous consent agreement means the final confirmation vote will happen no earlier than Wednesday, October 29th. Given the cloture vote, his confirmation seems very likely.
And after LaCour?
The Senate actually began considering another nomination right away, Joshua D. Dunlap from Maine. He's nominated for the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the First Circuit. That's a step up from a district court and appeals court judgeship. His cloture vote is scheduled for Thursday, October 30th.
Any other movement on nominations?
Yes, one other to note. William Kirk, nominated to be Inspector General for the Small Business Administration, this is an executive branch position, not judicial, was discharged from committee. That means his nomination now moves to the full Senate calendar, waiting for floor time, likely for a less controversial confirmation vote.
Okay, let's shift gears completely.
Yeah.
We've seen gridlock on funding, sharp partisanship on judges. But then there was this moment on trade policy that looks very different. Actual bipartisan agreement.
It really stands out, doesn't it? We're talking about Senate Joint Resolution 81. The Senate passed this measure 52-48, and its purpose was specific: to terminate tariffs on goods imported from Brazil.
52-48. That clearly wasn't a straight party line vote. It had to be a coalition.
Exactly. It required senators from both parties to cross the aisle and vote together against the administration's policy.
So tell us about these tariffs. They weren't legislated by Congress, right? They came from the White House.
Correct. The tariffs were imposed via Executive Order 12323 back on July 30th. The administration used a powerful tool called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA.
IETA allows the president to declare a national emergency and take economic actions.
Yes, broad authority. The executive order declared an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security from the government of Brazil. The stated reasons were things like alleged political persecution in Brazil and supposed pressure on U.S. social media companies over content moderation.
And the impact of the tariffs.
It was significant. An additional 40% tariff was slapped on top of existing ones, pushing the total duty on many Brazilian goods up towards 50%.
Okay, so the White House cited national security concerns related to Brazil's government. Why did a bipartisan majority in the Senate decide to overturn that?
The pushback wasn't really about disagreeing on the foreign policy assessment of Brazil. It was about the domestic economic consequences of the tariffs. Support for overturning them came from a really diverse mix groups like the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the National Taxpayers Union.
Groups focused on business and local government impact.
Precisely. Their argument was that these tariffs were causing direct harm here at home. They pointed to rising construction costs because building materials from Brazil got more expensive. They talked about ongoing supply chain problems being made worse.
Were there strategic concerns too?
Yes, quite a few senators argued the tariffs were counterproductive. They worried it would push Brazil, a major economy in South America, closer to China or Russia economically. The feeling seemed to be that the tangible economic pain felt by American businesses and consumers outweighed the somewhat, maybe abstract foreign policy rationale given for the emergency action.
So looking beyond just these specific Brazil tariffs, what's the bigger institutional picture here? Why is this 52-48 vote significant?
It's significant because Congress used a specific mechanism within the National Emergencies Act itself to directly terminate the president's emergency declaration regarding these tariffs. This is Congress actively pushing back and trying to reclaim some of its constitutional authority over trade policy, which many feel has tilted too far towards the executive branch.
It's a check on presidential power.
A clear check. When a president uses emergency powers like IEPA to impose major economic policy, and tariffs are essentially large taxes on trade, Congress gets nervous about the precedent. The fact that this vote was bipartisan suggests that senators in both parties want to put some limits on how presidents can unilaterally use these emergency powers, especially when the domestic economic costs seem high.
All right, let's turn to another area where the Senate was quite active, using the Congressional Review Act, the CRA. Remind us briefly what the CRA allows Congress to do.
The CRA is a really potent tool. It gives Congress the power to overturn regulations issued by federal agencies. And critically, it only requires a simple majority vote in both the House and Senate, plus the president's signature to nullify a rule. No filibuster involved.
And if a rule is overturned by the CRA?
It's gone, wiped off the books. And the agency is generally prohibited from issuing any new rule that's substantially the same without getting specific new authorization from Congress. So it's a powerful and usually permanent reversal.
Okay, so the Senate took aim at two specific regulations using the CRA on October 28th. First up was Senate Joint Resolution 80. This targeted a rule from the Bureau of Land Management, the BLM, affecting Alaska. What did that original rule do?
That BLM rule, finalized in 2022, significantly increased environmental protections in the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska, the NPRA. It's a huge area, about 23 million acres. The rule closed off about 52% of it to new oil and gas leasing and added safeguards for wildlife habitats and areas used by Native Alaskans for subsistence.
A significant conservation measure, that.
Definitely. Environmental groups saw it as a major win. So the Senate action on October 28th was a vote on a motion to proceed, basically, agreeing to formally debate Senate Joint Resolution 80, which would kill that BLM rule.
And that motion passed.
It did, 54 to 46. What was notable there was that Senator John Fetterman, a Democrat, joined with the Republicans to advance the resolution. The actual vote on passing the resolution itself to overturn the rule was expected the following day, October 29th.
This sounds like the classic environment versus energy development fight. What are the arguments for overturning the rule?
Supporters, mainly the oil and gas industry, Alaska's senators, and those focused on energy production, argue that rolling back the BLM rule is essential. They talk about boosting American energy security, creating jobs in Alaska, and generating tax revenue that supports state services and Native communities. They also argue the BLM rule went too far, possibly conflicting with the original intent for the reserve, which did anticipate some level of oil development.
And the arguments against overturning it.
Opponents, environmental organizations, some state attorneys general are calling it a reckless rollback. They warn about irreversible damage to the sensitive Arctic environment, the impact on climate change from more drilling, and critically, the threat to the traditional subsistence lifestyles of the indigenous communities who rely on the land and wildlife in the NPRA. It's a direct conflict between economic potential and environmental cultural preservation.
Okay, the second CRA target is, well, it's an unusual one, Senate Joint Resolution 69. This deals with owls.
Yes. Specifically, it targets a plan by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for managing barred owls in the Pacific Northwest. It's become surprisingly controversial.
What is the Fish and Wildlife Service proposing to do?
The plan involves the lethal removal, essentially, culling of potentially up to 500,000 barred owls across Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. Barred owls are not native to that region. They've moved in and are very aggressive.
And why would they do that? What's the goal?
The goal is to save a different owl, the native northern spotted owl. The spotted owl is listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, and its numbers have plummeted. Research indicates the primary reason is competition and displacement by the invasive barred owl.
So, killing one owl species to save another, I can see why that's controversial. What action did the Senate take?
They scheduled action. A vote on the motion to proceed to debate Senate Joint Resolution 69, the resolution to block the culling plan, was set for the afternoon of October 29th. This whole situation really pits two different conservation ethics against each other.
What's the argument from those using the CRA to try and stop the plan? Animal welfare groups.
Exactly. Animal welfare organizations are leading the charge against the Fish and Wildlife Service plan. They call it things like moral atrocity, fundamentally inhumane. Their core points are, 1, questioning whether mass culling on this scale is scientifically proven to work effectively long-term, and 2, a more fundamental ethical objection to the government engaging in widespread killing of animals, even invasive ones, to manage an ecosystem.
And what's the counterargument from the Fish and Wildlife Service and scientists who support the plan?
Their argument is that this is a difficult but necessary choice ecological triage, essentially. They point to extensive research showing the barred owl is, without doubt, the main factor driving the northern spotted owl toward extinction. They also cite smaller-scale pilot programs where removing barred owls did show a clear positive impact on spotted owl survival rates.
So they see it as the only viable option left.
Pretty much. Their position is it's unpleasant, but without this intervention, the northern spotted owl likely disappears forever. They see the CRA effort as potentially well-intentioned but ultimately undermining necessary science-based conservation action. It's a fascinating example of the CRA being used to force a political debate on a complex, ethically charged scientific issue.
Amidst all these high-profile, contentious votes, the gears of Congress were still turning on other, less dramatic items, right?
Oh, absolutely. There's always a lot happening beneath the surface of the big floor fights. The Senate, for example, managed to pass a couple of non-controversial resolutions without any fuss, using unanimous consent.
Like what?
Well, there was Senate Resolution 454 designating the last week of October as Bat Week,
That week. Okay.
and Senate Resolution 471 designating October 2025 as National Dyslexia Awareness Month. These pass quickly because there's no real opposition. Shows the Senate can agree when there's nothing ideological or financial at stake.
And what about the House of Representatives? It sounds like most of the action we've discussed was in the Senate.
The House was much quieter on October 28th. They held what's called a pro forma session. Basically, they gavel in and gavel out very quickly. This one lasted just 3 minutes, from 1 p.m. to 1:03 p.m., often just to meet constitutional requirements.
Did they do anything substantive during those 3 minutes?
They did file one report, House Resolution 689, related to evaluating agency permitting systems, and records show 34 public bills and 8 resolutions were formally introduced. But yeah, the main legislative drama that day was definitely Senate side.
Let's talk about committee work, too. While the Senate floor was busy with judges and regulations, committees were holding hearings, right?
Yes, and that's where a lot of the detailed policy work happens. Several important hearings took place. The Judiciary Committee, for instance, dug into competition problems in the seed and fertilizer markets.
Affecting farmers.
Directly. They heard testimony from farmers about how market consolidation, just a few big companies dominating, is impacting their costs and business. It signals concern about antitrust issues in agriculture. Then the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee looked at ways to boost the U.S. commercial shipbuilding industry.
That sounds like an economic and maybe national security issue.
Both. It ties into broader discussions about strengthening America's domestic industrial base, which has bipartisan interest. Also, a judiciary subcommittee focused on the Constitution held a hearing examining politically motivated violence and threats.
Related to January 6th.
It included testimony from a police officer who was actually defending the Capitol on January 6th, alongside experts discussing domestic extremism. It shows Congress is still grappling with the fallout and ongoing threats. And finally, the Armed Services Committee was busy with nominations.
Military nominations.
Yes, they finished hearings for 4 Assistant Secretary of Defense nominees. And then, importantly, they did a huge piece of administrative work. They favorably reported out 3,475 nominations for military officers across all the services: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Space Force. It's the kind of essential behind-the-scenes work that keeps the military leadership structure functioning, even while political battles rage elsewhere. Hashtag tag outro Brandjack.
So, wrapping up our look at October 28th, the picture that emerges is really one of paradox. You had the Senate incredibly focused and effective on things needing just that simple majority, lifetime judges confirmed, controversial regulations advanced or targeted for removal, tariffs overturned.
Intense activity in those areas. But at the exact same time, on the absolute core function of funding the government itself, total deadlock. They couldn't even get the 60 votes needed for the procedural step on House Resolution 5371, that temporary funding patch. So the institution seems highly capable of driving long-term ideological change via judges and regulations, but almost incapable of routine short-term fiscal management when consensus is required.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, our listener, to consider. We keep hearing that these continuing resolutions, like House Resolution 5371, are necessary evils, temporary bridges needed to get back to regular order, that traditional, predictable budget process.
But given the sustained struggle, the repeated failure to even pass the temporary bridge itself, what does that say about the actual health, the viability of that regular order they claim to be working towards? Is it even achievable in the current environment? Something to think about.